People want to know repetitively why I'm doing what I do. I have a show where it's called The Infallible Word, and we talk about the Bible verse by verse and only the Bible. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because as an ex-Latter-day Saint, 40 years active in the church, I know, even having visited last week an LDS church, I know they do not teach Jesus Christ and a regenerative relationship with Him. And so this year we've dedicated to church history. There's many of these things I really would prefer not to go through. They bore me. But I think that it's important for you to know the facts of church history so that if you decide to remain LDS and you truly believe you're a Christian, a born-again Christian, and you decide to remain LDS, fine. But you have to have all the facts. And that's why we're dedicating this time this year to church history. So we left off with Moroni and Joseph Smith's bedroom last week. Remember, it was the autumnal equinox. The date was September 21st, 22nd, 1823. Joseph Smith was 17 years old. Before we dive into an examination of the Book of Mormon itself, which I can't wait to do, we have to finish up Moroni's role in Joseph Smith's receiving and translating the Book of Mormon. There are some rare teachings I'm going to share with you tonight that the church readily admits. Take these teachings and ask yourself, does this sound like it is something in the way God works, or does this sound like the way man might work? From September 1823 to June 1829, Moroni would make repeated visits to Joseph Smith, his special student. In January of 1922, an article ran in the Ensign, which is an LDS magazine, and it called Moroni Joseph Smith's tutor. Now remember, Moroni is an angel. It says, quote, "It is impossible to determine the number of interviews Joseph had with Moroni, but 22 visits are often identified. As I have talked to LDS, my own family included, and asked them how many times did Moroni visit Joseph Smith before and after the golden plates were received, they all said 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the most. All right? We have at least 22. Working through Joseph Smith, the Lord brought about the translation and publication of the Book of Mormon in a remarkably short period of time, it says. As I said last week, 6 years is not a remarkably short amount of time for someone to have been talking about a record to the time that they produced a manuscript. Quote from the Church Magazine article, "This was possible because the Lord prepared Joseph in his formative years for his role as a prophet to the Most High. To that end, the Lord had assigned Joseph a personal tutor named Moroni. Officially, the church supports Joseph Smith's claims that Moroni visited him repeatedly before, during, and after receiving the golden plates." Let's examine these visits, and I'm going to make some commentary. Now, understand on my commentary, it's my opinion. In this situation, I can't tell you if Moroni actually appeared to Joseph Smith or someone who called himself Moroni or an angel. I can't say one didn't, and I can't say that one did. All I can say is ask questions as to the way the story goes down relative to what the Bible teaches and to determine if this angel was necessarily good or bad. The first 3 visits we've talked about, that happened in Joseph Smith's bedroom, and it was repeated 3 times in the same night. It's important to understand that in folklore magic, that 3 visits of a spirit were vital, because when a spirit appeared 3 times, it let the magician or the folklore believer know that this vision was real and that the spirit was genuine. If it appeared twice or once, it wasn't right. But when it appeared 3 times, then it was a legitimate visit of a spirit. And this ties right into the Book of Mormon of Moroni coming to him. It says, quote, in church article, "He, meaning Moroni, told Joseph Smith of the Urim and Thummim, which had been prepared to help translate the Book of Mormon." Now, if you're a Bible reader, and if you understood the Bible back then, you know that the Urim and Thummim were called lights and intelligences, I think. And these were Hebrew words. And what they were stones that were in a breastplate that the prophets would wear, okay? And on each stone was a name of one of the tribes of Israel. The Urim and Thummim is a strange thing in the Bible. We don't know exactly what it was. But what we do know is that the Urim and Thummim spoken of in Exodus 28:20 was not the Urim and Thummim that was supposed to be in the stone box with the gold plates that Joseph Smith could take out, and he could look through them and translate. The Urim and Thummim to Joseph Smith was a stone, a seer stone that we've talked about in the past, and he could look in that stone and he could translate this gold plate record that he says he had. So it says, going on, quote, Moroni also warned Joseph that when the time came to obtain the plates, that if he showed them to anyone not approved of the Lord, he would be destroyed. I've always wondered, why couldn't he show those plates to somebody? Why? What would the Lord's purpose be in him not being able to show the plates? And then later on, he showed them to 3 witnesses and then 8 witnesses, which we're going to discuss at length, that business. But why couldn't he show anybody? And why didn't the angel Moroni say to Joseph, you know what, Joseph? Don't tell anybody about these plates either. Because when you tell them, you're going to have persecution and troubles and trial and everything else. So in the wisdom of the Lord, why didn't the Lord have the angel say to Joseph, tell no one you have them? Instead, he tells everybody, and he spends all kinds of time pretending he's got these plates he's dodging around with, and they're always trying to find them. They can never find them. Why didn't the angel say, hey, Joseph, avoid problems? Don't tell anybody either. Think this stuff through, okay? So we have the fourth visit that occurs the next day. Joseph Smith wakes up, or never goes to sleep. He's very tired. He goes out to work with his father and brother in the field, and they see he's very tired, and they say, go home and go to sleep. As he's going home, he says he comes to a fence. He's too tired. He can't climb it. He falls in the grass, and the angel Moroni appears to him again. This is the 4th visit, and he says, Joseph, go tell your dad what happened. Joseph does what he said, and his dad said, as I believe you, go get the plates. So Joseph then treks to the hill Cumorah, 2 or 3 miles away from his house. All right? I have a question that I don't know the answer to. If you know this, call us and tell us. I wonder if the hill Cumorah was named the hill Cumorah by the state of New York, or if Joseph Smith named the hill Cumorah the hill Cumorah. I'm just curious about that. By the way, the LDS Church owns the hill Cumorah, and I don't know when they purchased it or how they got it, but it's theirs, and you can't go and do any excavating in it. So I think that's important to know. The 5th visit, on the west side of the hill Cumorah, near the top, Joseph located a large stone he was seeking. When he pried the stone lid away, he saw inside the box the sacred items spoken of by Moroni. Okay, so what's inside this box? Or where is this box? This was a stone box that was prepared by the ancient Nephites in the hill Cumorah, and in that stone box with a heavy stone lid over it were the golden plates. So Joseph says that the Moroni took the golden plates back into heaven so that we can live by faith. Fine. Where's the stone box? We have a hill Cumorah that's a very small geographical area relative to that community. Why can't we just see the stone box? You can go to Israel and you can see the paved roads. You can see the Parthenon. You can see these historical places. You can see Golgotha, where they called it the place of death. And you can see all these places as historical sites. Why can't we just LDS Church, just let us see the stone box that Joseph pulled this from the earth. All right? We have no history that he destroyed it later. So I'm assuming that it would still be there. He tried, this is still quoting, he tried 3 times to take the plates out of the box, but suffered progressively stronger shocks that deprived him of much of his natural strength until he exclaimed in frustration, why can I not obtain this book? Now I want you to know, if you read Michael Quinn's Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, shocks from these spirits that lived in the earth to protect the treasure was very much part of folklore, magical folklore, that when you went to get their treasure, they had the power to shock you. All right? And Joseph Smith is reaching into the earth to get the gold plates, and he receives 3 shocks of greater and greater strength, and he finally cries out, how come I can't obtain the plates? And all of a sudden he hears, because you have not kept the commandments of the Lord. This was the 5th time that Moroni had visited Joseph in a 24-hour period or less. He told Joseph to return 1 year later, and Moroni would meet him again at that spot. Now, why was 1 year important? Does the Lord say it's got to be 1 year to the day for you to do this thing? Does he operate in those ways? Maybe he does. If you can bring that up in the Bible, I might be mistaken. But this sounds more like another tie-in to magical practices. They had specific days. It had to be on the autumnal equinox, when the heavens would speak to the inhabitants of the earth and tell them where treasure was. And so I think that it just points to more folklore in the practices of Joseph Smith and the magic. Several secondhand accounts say that Joseph Smith was told by the angel Moroni that his brother Alvin had to accompany him to get the plates. And the problem is Alvin died unexpectedly. And so they were thrown into a big problem. There are several references, which I can't verify. They're secondary and tertiary sources. But there's several references that said that he said Alvin had to be with him. And Alvin ups and dies. I don't know why the Lord couldn't foresee that Alvin was going to die and why he would request that Alvin be there. But nevertheless, this is part of the story. So every year at the Hill Cumorah, instructions were given to Joseph Smith to prepare him for the restoration. On visit number 6, when Joseph went back to Cumorah on the 22nd of September, 1 year later, he once again dislodged the stone and containing the plates. And while he was taking the plates out, he wondered to himself, is there any more treasures in that box? And he set the plates down. And he looked in there and he looked back and the plates were gone. Okay, and he asked the Lord, why have you taken these from me? And Moroni appeared and reminded him that he had not done as he was commanded. Now, according to Joseph Smith's mom, she said that Joseph had been told in a former revelation by the angel Moroni, quote, not to lay the plates down or put them for a moment out of his hands until he got into the house and deposited them in a chest or trunk, having a good lock and key. This is getting really amazing, isn't it? You know, the plates can disappear, they can reappear, they can do this. The angel Moroni, wait till you hear what he can do with the plates later. But Joseph has to put them in the house under lock and key so no one else can see them. Do you see this thing kind of like spiraling out of control when it comes to the ability to pull off the con? I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you. If Joseph Smith said, I received revelations and wrote the Book of Mormon, like Muhammad said, that the angel Gabriel came to him and gave him the Quran, I would respect it more. If Joseph Smith said, like the Jehovah's Witnesses said, that angels came and revealed things and that angels protect the Jehovah's Witness church, I might believe it more. If Joseph had said, like Mary Ellen G. White says of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that angels played a part in their receiving their revelations, I might. But this stuff, it continues to grow. You have to know, does this lead you to truth? All right? So Joseph Smith sets the plates down, looks back in the box, looks back and they're gone. And this is all part of the little demon guys who live and they're guardians of treasure, and they can go, and if you don't protect your gold, they can steal it from you and they can move it through the earth. And you can see it in your seer stone in one place and you go to dig for it and they move it to another place. And so when you dig for it and it's gone, then you can say, the guardian spirits got the gold and they moved it. And that's what he is telling you here in this thing. He set it on the earth, he looked back and it's gone. Why? Because when Joseph looked back into that box, the plates had been put back there. And then the angel Moroni told him, you didn't take them out in the right process, therefore you can't have them again. Okay. When those golden plates were put back in the box, Joseph reached in and he went to grab them and he was hurled back, quote, was hurled back upon the ground with great force. Again, we have this metaphysical thing of this power that's doing it. Whether it was true, I don't know. But this is what it is said. Okay, so we find that Joseph says, and his mother reports, that he goes back home. This is after the 3rd year, and he's very disappointed, and he's crying and weeping, and he's embarrassed to go before his family who are waiting to see the plates. Now, I have a question for you. If you had seen God the Father and Jesus Christ in a first vision, if you have seen an angel of God at least 6 times whose brightness and glory defy that of the sun, which is how he described it, would you be afraid of what your family thought when you went back and told them that you couldn't get the plates for another year because you had just done it wrong that time? I know that's one of the signs of someone who's come to know the Lord. They're not afraid of man. They're not afraid of anything because they have been changed by God. Would you come back in fear if you've had these real experiences of what your family would say? I don't think so. Again, these are my thoughts. In 1825 and 1826, verses 7 and 8 happen. And I believe that during these 4 years of waiting to get the plates, Joseph was writing an outline. I believe he was preparing his notes for what the Book of Mormon would be. I believe he was pulling from these sources that we're going to start getting into next week. He was pulling from republicanism of the time. He was pulling from themes that occurred in 19th century. He was pulling from Solomon Spaulding's books. He was pulling from what B.H. Roberts talked about. He pulled from the Bible. He pulled from all kinds of sources. And I believe that during that span where he was saying, I can't get the plates, he was working on a rough outline. And I also believe he was working on a set of plates. His dad was a cooper, someone who worked with tin. They did it out in their garage, so to speak. It wasn't a garage, but their farm or whatever. And I'm sure they came up with a mock set so that they could heft them around. People could see them or feel them if they were really good friends or touch them. But I don't believe they were golden plates. I think they were a mock set. Here's one of the great things in Visits 7 and 8. Joseph had not received the plates yet. Understand this. And Lucy Mack Smith, his mother, writes, listen to this. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life with them. This is before he ever received the golden plates. Okay? I know that when I tried for years to write scripts for Hollywood and submitted them to large studios, that as I was going through those, I would tell the stories to people I knew and see what their reactions would be to the scripts. I would tell the things as I was developing it in my mind to see how they would react and if it would be something I should keep. Joseph Smith told his parents and his family gather around the fire at night and tell them the stories about the ancient Nephites and describe everything about them, and he hadn't even gotten the plates yet. How? History of the Church tells us in 537 that Joseph saw other celestial beings between 1823 and 1827. Ivan J. Barrett, a religious professor at BYU, wrote that, quote, Joseph was visited by a host of people from the Book of Mormon while translating the plates, including Nephi, Alma, Mormon, and the 12 disciples Jesus chose during his visit to the Americas. Okay, so this is like saying, what would you think if I said J.K. Rowling, when she wrote the Harry Potter series, had Harry Potter and all the characters come and visit her as spirits and tell her about what world she was writing of? What would you think of her? First, would you believe the story? You might say never. Or you might say possible, but what kind of spirits were these? This is exactly what they're saying here. In 1832, 34, 35, and 38, there seems to be a revision of what Joseph said, and the folklore magic elements of Moroni's visits to him were starting to be taken out, and they were starting to give us a more pure version of what was acceptable to tell. Visit 19, Joseph meets the Moroni on the hill Cumorah, and the Moroni tells him it's time to get the plates. And then on visit 9, then in visit 10 on September 22nd, the autumnal equinox again, the angel gives Joseph the plates. It had been 4 years. Joseph was now 22 years old. What was he and his father, who once taught English, what were they doing during that 4-year period of time? We know that Joseph got married. We know that he lost a brother to an unexpected death during those years. And I propose that, and I may be wrong, that was when he was working on the outline, so that when he could put the stone in the hat to translate, he could take that outline, and he knew what the outline was good enough, and he could get and study it, and then he could go and he could just give you fill in the blanks of what should happen therein. Additional visitations of Moroni occurred after Joseph said he received the plates. We know that when he was translating the plates, he lost part of them because Martin Harris, the guy who was helping him translate, gave them to his wife. Moroni took the Urim and Thummim away from Joseph, so he couldn't translate for about a month. Gave them back to him, and then he could retranslate again. There's a whole bunch of other appearances of the angel Moroni to Joseph for the witnesses, which we're going to talk about after we talk about the construction of the Book of Mormon. And that ends with Moroni taking the plates back into heaven and disappearing once and for all with the gold plates and with no evidences of what the Book of Mormon says around it. That concludes the angel Moroni's supposed contributions to the gold plates.